So the 96th Academy Awards are nearly here, and I'll be watching more intently than ever, because we've learned in the last few years that anything can happen on the night. We can get mistakes where they give the Oscar to the wrong movie, mistakes where they give the Oscar to the wrong person, attempted murder, the whale coming on stage and going, "This is what the multiverse looks like." I'm still trying to figure out why he did that, but it's really exciting, even if the reality of the ceremony is just going to be Jimmy Kimmel going, "Have you guys noticed that these movies are really long?" The main event, as always, is Best Picture, and this year that category is really strong. All the nominees are impressive for one reason or another, so I thought it would be fun to talk about all of them, see how they compare to one another, and decide which is the best one. Is it futile to try and compare such a diverse selection of films? Yes. Will I do it anyway because people respond well to ranking videos? Also yes. So without further ado, let's dive into them. In 10th place, we have American Fiction, which didn't do much for me. I admit that I might not be the right audience for it, but I just found it very disappointing. The central premise of an author pandering to a white audience by playing up racial stereotypes is a good one. It's just that the execution is full of contrivance, and I think the movie knows this, because it hardly ever dwells on the logistics of this thread for any real time. In a way, the movie feels better for it, because the most interesting thing it's doing is just the normal stuff with his family. But the satire side of things is harmed by the fact they're afraid to commit to the farce. I think they kind of play it half straight, half embarrassed, and it doesn't help the drama or the comedy. There's a lot of stuff that feels like making up a guy to get angry at and then writing a scene where you win an argument against them. Obviously, some of this stuff is based on a type of person that does exist, but none of it feels authentic in the film. Sometimes the absurdity of that is kind of funny, other times it just comes off as smug. So I suppose in that sense it kind of sits somewhere in between Curb Your Enthusiasm and Ricky Gervais's Afterlife, tending to skew towards the latter. There's a kind of righteous centrism that runs through the whole thing. It starts with these friggin' Gen Z snowflakes attitude that I didn't love, not because it's dull and overplayed, but because, I was triggered. Tar did it better. Jeffrey Wright is a compelling enough screen presence for the film not to be boring, but I think his character can come across as pretty unlikable, and not in a way that feels particularly fun or interesting. Tar did it better. Sterling K. Brown is really great, but I wish he had more to do. If the film was less interested in the nonsense of its central premise and more interested in its characters, I would have been right there with it. But as it stands, it's a kind of okay film with stuff I didn't really like, and an ending especially that didn't work for me. It was like the ending from Greta Gerwig's Little Women, except it undercut the experience rather than enhanced it. So yeah, the film is not totally devoid of anything to like, it's just not something I feel any real love for. In 9th place, we have Maestro, a film that's alright. It's the story of composer, musician, everything, Leonard Bernstein, and it's become a bit of a punching bag this season because Bradley Cooper is trying so hard to win an Oscar. I've had months of hearing about this film either being breathtaking or embarrassing, so I didn't really know what to expect when I went in. And I found the first half pretty annoying. The way it moved through the story, the way everyone spoke to each other, it felt to me like it thought it was being clever, and it was just obnoxious. There's a bit where we see the end of an interaction, and it's two characters trying to remember as much as they can about the other from the off-screen conversation they've had, and it's just a way for each of them to monologue in each other's faces, exposition about the other, really. There's a couple of other bits where an interviewer will say, "Leonard, you've done this, and this. That's good, isn't it?" And I don't know, stuff like that I found annoying. Sometimes someone will say something that's long and profound sounding, and I'll get to the end of it and think, I don't think I've actually absorbed any meaning from that. I don't know. It could have been that while I was watching this movie, I was just being a moron. It has been known to happen, very rarely I will add, but I just felt a lot of the time it was a lot of words to say not very much at all. But either I settled into the film or the film settled into itself in the second half, because I was a lot more interested in it. I was a lot more engaged in the emotional beats and in the twists and turns. I think it won me over quite successfully. I don't know that Bradley Cooper is doing a mind-blowing performance, but at the same time, it didn't come across to me like he was trying too hard. I think he's pretty good. We see the character at 3 distinct stages of his life. At the start, it kind of felt to me like he was doing 70% of a Seinfeld impression, and at the end, he very much felt like an actor in old man makeup. But for the most part, we spend our time with the middle portion, and it's definitely the most interesting time in his life, I think. He's achieving this feat of being an infuriating bastard bastard while remaining quite likeable in the process. You really do, I think, believe in his genius, and the physicality of the conducting is very impressive. I have to give Bradley Cooper the credit for that. And I'm always happy to see Carey Mulligan in a thing. There can be such a warmth in her eyes, and I think it's incredibly interesting when that warmth leaves her eyes, which we see in this film. I think the film's use of Bernstein's music is fantastic. I think it has some cool, unique visuals. It has a kind of fantastical, musical-ish scene that I think didn't necessarily work for me, but I'm always glad of someone trying to do a thing. So while I didn't find it spectacular, I got more from this film than I maybe expected to when I went in, and definitely more from this film than I expected at the halfway point. In 8th place, we have Barbie. I like Barbie. I think it's fun and nice, and some of the emotional beats hit me in the way they were intended to. I think maybe in the broader landscape of film, it's maybe not as important as it's being painted as, but at the same time, a film with this director and this message doing so well and becoming such a cultural moment is probably a good thing, even if I think the script is a little messy. As a comedy, I think this film is very successful. It's got a bunch of memorable, quotable lines, some funny gags. Ryan Gosling is a sublime comedic presence. I think he definitely deserves the awards attention he's received. He is the standout of this film. Considering the discourse that his nomination caused, you'd think he was nominated for Best Actress. I think the fundamental problem with pretending this is an important feminist text that the public has failed by focusing so much of their attention on Ken is that the film focuses so much of its attention on Ken. I think to the point where Barbie as a character suffers. She feels pretty irrelevant in the third act to the point where her resolution feels a bit like an afterthought, which is a shame because Margot Robbie is fantastic at what they do let her do, both comedically and dramatically. I love that scene of her on the bench, and I wish it lent more into that kind of stuff, and I just think it doesn't, or it kind of pretends to. The same goes for Gloria as a character and her daughter as well. Once the speeches are done, so are they, as far as the movie's concerned. That's why I think the movie's non-comedic value is maybe a little oversold. It's very uneven, simultaneously very deliberately heavy-handed, and at the same time kind of uninterested in its own messaging. It's not that it never works on this level, but it's definitely the side of the film that holds it back. I love Greta Gerwig. Her Little Women is one of my favourite films of all time, so I went into this with really high expectations, and I think it is definitely her worst film. I wish Little Women had had the awards and public attention that this film received, but I guess it had fewer toys to sell, so it, wasn't allowed to be as much of an event. I feel like I've maybe come across as a bit more negative here than I necessarily want to. It's a film I like. It's a film I think is funny and good. I like the big pink world, the production design, the VFX that they pretended weren't VFX. I just wish it was as revolutionary as its reputation has built it up to be. But I think maybe if you're a Barbie fan watching this and you're going, well, you're not even meant to get it, it's not for you, you might be right, but it is my list. In 7th place, we have The Zone of Interest. From this point on, everything else on the list is pretty unambiguously great. I think we're working with very similar levels of remarkable across some very different projects. Zone of Interest is, for the most part, just the story of a German family and their home life. It's just that their home is right next to Auschwitz, and the father of the family is the man who runs the concentration camp. We'll be in the middle of a mundane domestic scene, and then suddenly the camera will flip and reveal that the whole time we've been watching, the backdrop for what we've seen is the wall of Auschwitz, the barbed wire, the smoking chimneys, or marching Nazi soldiers. But we'll never see more than that. Because of this, so much has to be done with sound, and they create such a terrible soundscape of the camp, and there's so many sounds that are just too distant or too unclear for us to know exactly what's going on, but we have enough information for our imagination to do so much of the work for us, and it's just a really distressing experience, really. The way they combine the sounds with the score is just horrifying, and I think especially in the credits, but it's all through the film. It's omnipresent in a way that at the start has you thinking, how the hell did any of these people get anything done with this constant, overbearing horror? But then, as the film progresses, you kind of learn to tune it out as well, and until it ramps the volume back up, and you're kind of snapped out of it, I suppose, and you feel horrible for managing to get yourself invested in the family life and the workplace drama of these characters in the face of what is really going on. When the characters do address the reality they're living in, it's awful. It's detached, cold, practical, logistical, but it's even worse when they don't address what's going on. And for the most part, they don't. The characters aren't presented as cackling villains. They're good fathers, good mothers, wives, colleagues, but they're just allowing and enabling and causing these horrific atrocities. The way it's framed with these static camera angles both in and around their house, it makes you feel like a fly on the wall, just helplessly watching these events unfold. A bit like CCTV. I think the performances as well are able to bring a human authenticity to a situation that just feels unimaginable. It's bleak and harrowing and soul-destroying, and I don't know if it's because of how heavy it was, and I just didn't want to see any more of it. But I think if I had one complaint, it's that there did come a certain point in this film where I thought, okay, I think I get what you're doing. I'd fully understood and absorbed what the film was saying, the point that it was making, and beyond that, I'm not sure that I gained much. I mean, I had a friend who said he felt that after 10 minutes, that just at that point you're like, yeah, okay, I get it. I know what the film's doing. By piling these scenes on, you're not exactly enhancing the experience on that level. I didn't feel it 10 minutes in. I maybe felt it 2/3 of the way in, but I think, yeah, it's true that there does come a point where you go, okay, yeah, I understand this film. And it's not that once you've understood it, you can't continue to gain from it. But in this case, I think that was kind of the case. But don't get me wrong, it is still sickening, powerful stuff. And I recommend it hugely. I hated every minute of it, and I'm so glad I watched it. In 6th place, Anatomy of a Fall. What a wonderful Sandra Hüller double bill we've ended up with. In this film, she is back with an even better performance, I think, or at least one that allows her to shine. Because this is the story all about how her husband got flipped and turned upside down. His body is found having fallen from the top of his house, and the central question of the film is, did she push him? And the answer is, I don't know, maybe? It's really hard to decide. It has the premise of a murder mystery, but it isn't one, because it's not particularly interested in the truth, it's just interested in the objective events that the death causes. Samuel is killed very early on in the film, and the first act is mostly spent very effectively laying the groundwork for the murder trial that makes up the bulk of the film's runtime. We meet Sandra and her son Daniel and their dog Snoop. We get a bit of an understanding of their home life, and as best we can, an understanding of the events surrounding Samuel's death. The next hour and 40 minutes is pretty much entirely dedicated to the court case, the court proceedings. And I don't know if it's accurate to how French court really is, but it makes for incredible drama because you've got people all talking at once, a big kind of group conversation essentially. You've got people making outrageous personal accusations within the court case that seems to be okay with the judge. You've got all kinds of things, and it makes it so entertaining and so interesting, and you never really know what's going to happen next or what's going to be brought up. I think it helps because these scenes are long. These are long scenes. Cross-examinations, arguments, conversations. We hear played back one of the arguments that Sandra and Samuel had. And these scenes never once lost my attention. They are incredibly snappy, whether they're in French or English. In some cases, they're in both languages. It's funny that despite their house being in such a stunning visual location, the stuff that really had me on the edge of my seat glued to the screen was everything that happened in the courtroom. It feels so dynamic. It never just sits there and holds on a particular angle and just lets us get bored of what we're seeing. It's always finding a way to make the space feel interesting and feel big and framed behind a particular person, in front of a particular person, letting us see people's different reactions to things. I think every time it panned out and showed the entirety of the courtroom, I was surprised at how small it felt because they make it feel so impressively big and give it so much potential for framing, and I think that's really, really impressive. Sandra Hüller was fantastic as this kind of paradox of a character who's simultaneously shrouded in moral ambiguity and honest about herself and her thoughts to a fault. I think her son Daniel is almost similarly hard to read. I think getting inside his head is difficult, but at the same time I don't feel like with either of them I'm kept at arm's length. I feel like I'm able to care about them and their emotional state despite not knowing what's going on inside their heads. Then we have Vincent, her defense lawyer, and I thought he was really cool. Just a really great presence, a really interesting kind of character that we see a more personal side of than the prosecution. But when it comes to those court cases, the prosecution is also fantastic. He's electric. He's kind of really an attack dog in those scenes. And I think I could never be in the jury in a case like that, because depending on whichever lawyer or expert was talking, whatever they were saying, I was going, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, I think this person's telling the truth. And then, someone would come up and say the opposite, and I'd go, oh yeah, that last person was lying. Yeah, they were wrong. So, I mean, that's the film, isn't it? It doesn't necessarily come down on a particular side. It lets you do a lot of your own thinking, which in my case I'm not well equipped for at all. But it's such an engaging watch. It's such a compelling time from start to finish. And yeah, I can't recommend this one enough, really. I've just recommended it to my parents, and I texted them afterwards, do you think she did it? And yeah, it's great having that discussion. I think it's a good thing to have a film that gets you talking and gets you thinking and is as visually stimulating as it is intellectually stimulating. And yeah, it's great entertainment. It's not... I think sometimes a film has subtitles, or a film is in multiple languages, or it's on the Oscars list, and people think, oh, they're pretentious, just one of those artsy-fartsy films. Anyone could enjoy this. I think that's a shame that Oscar films have that kind of reputation, because stick this in front of anyone and they are having a good time. In fifth place, we have Past Lives, which I thought was really beautiful. It's got this delightfully simple premise of two people who knew each other as children in Korea before one of them moved to North America, and the connection that they have across various stages of their lives. I think in the sea of big, important stories, both this year and in general, this is just a wonderful portrait of human beings and their relationships. Obviously, it's possible to boil a lot of films down to that, but usually there's a bit more plot going on. I was specifically reminded of Moonlight because the entire draw is just living with these people for the duration of this part of their lives. In that sense, it's kind of what I wish American fiction had done more of. And this film, it makes it incredibly easy to spend time with these characters. Greta Lee is a radiant presence as Nora. You're completely absorbed in her. She feels so alive, and it's fascinating seeing the different sides of her come out depending on who she's spending time with, and that's definitely really helped by the fact that also changes the language she's speaking in. Then we have Teo as Hae-sung. He has this incredible vulnerability that manages to never veer into pitiful, and you're able to fully believe that he has spent 20 years loving this woman he hardly knows, without that ever seeming obsessive. I think it's a really lovely performance. We also have Nora's American husband, who I think we expect to hate because of what we expect from the narrative, but reality gets in the way. He's just a good dude who loves Nora, and Nora loves him. That's the whole film. There are no right or easy answers here. Nora and Hae-sung are not necessarily soulmates that were separated by circumstance, but they're not necessarily not that. The film rejects a lot of the assumptions we might make about the premise and leaves us with something that feels a lot more real and is so much better for it. The three of them are practically the only characters in the film, so in that sense it has a bit of a stage-like quality, but it's not stagey in a negative way. I think it does hold on their faces a lot in these kind of static shots that just linger on the characters and let the actors do the work and let the emotion of the scene do the work. But that never, to me, comes across. I know that's kind of what I praised Anatomy of a Fall for not doing, but in this sense, it feels incredibly intimate. It feels like we are just able to watch and observe these human beings going through some really complicated stuff, and we're given the space to appreciate that. But it's still very cinematic. We get some gorgeous shots that kind of place them in their respective contrasting environments. I'm annoyed it had such a short theatrical release where I live because I didn't get to see it on the big screen. But even at home, I was on board from the very start and was just captivated for the rest of the duration. This feels like one that will stick with me for a long time, and I'm so glad the awards buzz has forced me to sit down and watch it. I feel like that's the benefit of doing this Oscars farce every year, is that it shines a light on films that my local cinema or just my film viewing habits in general I might have otherwise overlooked. In fourth place, I've put Killers of the Flower Moon, one of the most affecting films I saw last year. It's an absolutely remarkable piece of work, and I find it amazing that Scorsese is still able to hit it so far out of the park this late into his career. It's a devastating and captivating portrait of the banality of evil, and everyone involved is on their absolute A-game. From how it looks to how it sounds, the rich and authentic feel of the setting just transports you into these historical events that we should all know more about. At the centre of it is Leonardo DiCaprio playing one of the biggest stupid moron fuckheads ever put to screen. The last time a character was this easy to manipulate was when the Dean was teaming up and double-crossing everyone in the conspiracy episode of Community. He walks a very complicated line between likeably dim and completely repugnant. There's something terrifying about how a man who seems generally, on the whole, pretty well-meaning is able to be not just complacent but directly involved in a genocide. I think we take Leo for granted these days. The fact there's no awards attention for this performance is probably proof of that. If anyone else had done it, I feel like there'd be a real fuss. But it's Leo. There's no surprise. He's brilliant. But credit to him, he has dedicated most of this award season just supporting and campaigning for Lily Gladstone. And quite right too. She is a revelation. Molly is a pillar of strength and grace in the face of such catastrophic circumstances, a beacon of morality surrounded by genuine evil. It's a heartbreaking performance, and it's the element of this film that has stuck with me the most since watching it. I really think Lily Gladstone does deserve the Oscar. Then there's De Niro, who, similar to Scorsese, is just an octogenarian proving to us that we're not good enough. It doesn't make sense to me that a man this late in his career can turn in such a fantastic, one of his career best performances in the sea of movies about being a naked granddad. And obviously The Irishman, which was also fantastic. He's this awful, scary presence, about as evil as a human being can be, but never feeling cartoonish or artificial. It's terrible seeing him go from this unassuming, nice, outgoing, charming staple of the community to just being a cold and ruthless murderer, pulling the strings for so many killings. It's got a supporting cast full of unique-looking guys, each with some very memorable moments and line deliveries. Jesse Plemons is always a delight, Brendan Fraser has the girth. As I said, just everyone doing really great work. There's been all this boring talk about how long the film is, but you're swept up in every moment. It's written and edited so well, I don't think there's any part of this movie that doesn't in some way serve what the film is doing. Not that I think we should be boiling down a film, each scene into what's necessary, but at the same time, I'd struggle to find much in this film that wasn't necessary. The film had me so involved in its events that certain developments had me gasping, they had me overcome with emotion. I just think it's a really fine piece of work. If you haven't seen it, you definitely should. Just talking about it, I kind of realised that I'm overdue a rewatch as well. But yeah, just a fantastic film. In third place, The Holdovers. What a wonderful movie. I wish it had come out during the holidays in the UK because it really should be enjoyed as a Christmas film. Honestly, it might be one of the best Christmas films of all time, and I'm really looking forward to rewatching it as part of the actual holiday experience. It's sweet and cozy without that ever feeling sickly, and it's funny, it's pretty hilarious, without that ever taking away from the drama. In fact, it pretty much always adds to it. It's just so beautifully human. It's another premise that's very simple. It's just a boy that has to stay at boarding school over the holidays and the members of staff that supervise him. But within this simplicity is a wealth of nuance and complexity, and it's just a joyful examination of how much we all have in common as sad, broken people. Doesn't sound joyful, but I think it is joyful. I suffer from an affliction called being a fan of franchises that produce slop, and that's left me wanting when it comes to dialogue and characters for a while. So it's nice seeing something that spends so much care and attention looking at what these characters want, what they feel, what they think, what they need, and how those particular wants and needs manifest themselves in each particular situation. The development of the story and the relationships feels so earned. There's no questioning any decision or reaction. I feel like that authenticity allows you to be really brought in and engage with these events and these characters on such an emotional level. It's held together by three absolutely perfect central performances. All three of them are worthy of awards recognition, but I'm glad two of them at least are getting it. Paul Giamatti is definitely giving one of the best performances of the year, and newcomer Dominic Sessa is really holding his own by his side. And Divine Joy Randolph is at the heart of everything that works about this movie. It's not that the movie feels like an instant classic, it's that it feels like it's already a classic. And I don't just mean because of the presentation, probably a little bit because of the presentation. It's set in 1970 and it really feels like it's from 1970 with the appropriate visuals and the needle drops. I think it really gets a great sense of the era. But it goes beyond that, I think. It feels like the kind of thing I'm not used to seeing, focusing on things I maybe don't expect to get the priority in this media landscape. I'm really glad people have responded well to it, and I hope it continues to be watched and rewatched for a very long time, maybe as part of the holiday routine. In second place is Poor Things. I thought Poor Things was exceptional. It's one of those cases where pretty much the entire movie rests on the shoulders of the central performance. All the other stuff in the movie, as wonderful as a lot of it is, feels like it would be pretty worthless if Emma Stone was any less perfect. Fortunately, she's absolutely mesmerizing. It's such an accomplishment. She makes a job that must have been challenging and demanding feel natural and effortless, in a way that I think people are overlooking just how good she was. As I've said, I'm on Team Lily Gladstone, but I've seen people on my side of the argument dismiss the strength of Emma Stone's performance here, and I won't stand for that. I think she's really fantastic, and if she won the Oscar, I don't think I'd be able to argue too much. I think they should probably give her Best Actress, though, rather than Best Picture, because it caused a bit of trouble last time they did the latter. The character of Bella Baxter is fascinating. She's the result of Willem Dafoe's science experiment, and we really see her develop throughout the film. Her physicality and her use of language evolve in such a gradual, natural way that we don't even necessarily always notice that it's happened, but it takes her from mental infancy to mature eloquence. And every stage of that journey is just as compelling as the last. She's been written so brilliantly, the whole film has, and there's not a single weak link among the performances that bring this script to life. Mark Ruffalo is really fun, and it's marvellous seeing him excel in a real film that's truly great, but I am surprised he's the one that's got the Best Supporting Actor nom, because for me, it's Willem Dafoe who really shines in his role as Bella's creator or father, Godwin, or God for short. It's a strange, funny, sad performance that's really stuck with me. To be honest, it's just a strange, funny, and sad movie. I know there are people who haven't responded well to it, but Yorgos Lanthimos' style feels like exactly what this film needs. The same goes for all the design work. The weirdness of the world allows it all to be heightened and on the nose in a way that feels appropriate. I like the visual quirks, I think they're fun, and again, it's good to have something that stimulates your eyes, even though the story is good enough that it could get by with a lot less. It's fantastic not having to settle for less and just being treated to excellence in every department. The score was outstanding. Everything was outstanding. There's nothing to complain about here. I enjoyed every minute of it a lot, and the overall film is something that I think really works on every level that it's kind of attempting to work. On any other year, I feel like this would have topped my list of best films. It's just that, well, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. Because in first place is Oppenheimer. It's hard to say much about Oppenheimer that hasn't already been said, but I almost feel like it's not been said enough. That the general consensus that this is really good is getting in the way of the fact that this is great, because it's truly masterful. The film expertly juggles multiple plot lines and time periods in a way that makes them all feel equally exciting and important, which is such a feat given how varied they are in stakes and scale. Whenever you're watching one time period play out, you are entirely engaged with it, consumed by it, but then when it switches to another strain, you're not in any way upset, you're completely happy to go along with it because it's interwoven with such a genius seamlessness. The way each thread feeds into the rest of the film is astounding. The way they mirror each other, they build on each other, they foreshadow each other. It's hard to know whether to credit the screenplay or the editing or the direction, because every aspect of this film is working in such perfect harmony. I feel like it's the obvious pick for all of the categories it's nominated in, and should have been the pick for some that it wasn't. It's driven by this snappy, electric dialogue that is biting and witty and often pretty funny. Every character is so well defined and brought to life by some of the best performances in anything ever. I think the ensemble of funny little guys is so good that potentially Cillian Murphy gets a bit overshadowed when we talk about this film. Or it may be that, again, like Leo, he's so consistently brilliant that this is no surprise. But the whole film depends on him being superb, and he really is superb. He's so engrossing as a presence. As much as Oppenheimer can be an abrasive, egotistical arsehole who can't seem to speak his mind on literally anything, you're right there with him, invested in these twists and turns of quite an extraordinary story as we see these years of his life play out. He has me hanging on every word, every micro-expression, and not just because I want Oppie to actually come out and say something he believes in, but because he sells everything from the smallest moments of indecision to the biggest moments of emotional devastation. It's one of those performances where I find it hard to humour any other suggestion of who should win Best Actor. It's gotta be Cillian. The same is true of Robert Downey Jr. as Lewis Strauss, although maybe I have a little bit more sympathy for the Robert De Niro cause on that front than I do for any of the leads. But RDJ is just fantastic in this film. At times he's got a bit of that kind of fast-talking Tony Stark-esque bravado that we might expect from him, but when we see his true, vindictive, spiteful, working in the shadows self, it's incredibly exciting, and I think it's a deliciously layered, nuanced performance, and I'm so excited for what Downey's future holds now that it's no longer encased in iron. I mentioned the ensemble cast, but it really is one of the best I've ever seen. You're watching it and you go, oh, they're very good. I must make a note of them to mention and describe as a highlight. But then you get to the end of the runtime and you're like, actually, there are about 25 of those and I've forgotten who I was thinking of. Once you start listing individuals, it's very hard to stop. But I am going to start. I think Josh Hartnett, David Krumholtz, and Alden Ehrenreich are the real scene stealers. Alden especially holds his own and goes toe-to-toe with RDJ's career best work. And you come away from those scenes thinking just as much about him as you are about Downey. Matt Damon is great too. I really like Florence Pugh as well. It's nothing groundbreaking from them, but they do exactly what the film needs them to do. But that praise applies to everyone in this film. They're all doing exactly what the film needs them to do, and doing it pretty perfectly. I can't remember the last film that had this kind of impact on me. I don't know that there was one. This is the film I've probably seen the most times in the cinema. I kept thinking, well, this is a film I love, and it's never going to be as good as it is on the big screen, so I may as well go back for one more viewing, and one more turn to 5 in total. It's so visually impressive, and I'm so glad that one of the times I saw it was in IMAX, because although a lot of it is just conversations, it uses the IMAX format to really push in on those faces, to really take something that's massive and huge and make it feel incredibly intimate. That's something that the film does in pretty much every category, really. It makes it feel personal. It makes it feel like something you can connect to, even though the scale of it is sometimes unimaginable. The sound as well is spectacular, both in IMAX and in normal mode, and fucking hell, that score. Ludwig Göransson is just absolutely transcendent. He's just had such a fantastic career already, and I'm so excited to see what he does next. This is just one of my favourite film scores of all time. So yes, of course, Oppenheimer is at the top of this list. I'd love to see it take home everything, but I really think it would be nice if Best Picture could be awarded to the film that actually was the best picture in the year that it came out. So there we have it, 10-ish good films, and quite a few great ones. Obviously I have my favourite, but it wouldn't be a great injustice if some of these runners-up won. And this is just my list. I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think about this list of Best Picture nominations? What's your favourite? What's your least favourite? Is there a film that isn't on this list and you think should be, or a film that is on this list and you think shouldn't be? Please let me know all your general thoughts, opinions about the Oscars this year, and about film as a whole in 2023, and I guess the first bit of 2024. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a like. Subscribe. I do videos like this. I do other videos. We have fun, I think. But yeah, I'll be back next week. I'll see you all very soon. I love you lots.